This luncheon for the Chicago community is one of the greatest moments of the entire year.
Look what's going on in the world. Look at Syria. Look at all over the world where, cleansing is taking place as we speak.
The museum couldn't be more relevant than it is, because it's a reminder of the past, and it isn't just a reminder actually of the past. That is only part of it. It's the fact that things that happened years ago can happen again.
I'm a child of two survivors. My mother was a survivor of Auschwitz. My father survived in hiding. And they always worried, who would tell the story? Who would remember? Who would care? It's the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum that is helping the world remember, care, and learn lessons.
Please welcome Director of the Midwest Regional Office, Jill Weinberg.
I'm so pleased to welcome you all to this year's United States Holocaust Memorial Museum Risa K. Lambert Luncheon. I'm so proud of this community and what we have achieved in the last 30 years. And yet it is so clear that in these challenging times, we have so much more to do. Many of you have asked me, who is going to care about the Holocaust in the future? I believe this next video will help us answer that question and introduce you to this year's chairs, the extraordinary chairs of our luncheon.
Throughout my entire life, my parents were real involved with the museum. I began to develop more of my own identity with the museum after college.
I first got involved with the museum because my friend Scott Bernstein sent me an invitation to an event that the museum was having. I heard Leo Lambert speak, and it was Leo's story of how he created the Committee on Conscience that spoke to me as a call to action.
My family has a strong connection to the museum. I went to the event with Aaron Tucker and Scott Bernstein. Quickly we realized we were the youngest people there after looking around the room, and there was no one even close to our age. We approached Jill and said, why isn't there something for kids in their 20s, post-college age? So, of course, she put it on us, and here we are.
In 2008, the goal, I think, was to fill up the room with 25 people, and for that first event, there was almost 50 people, and it was standing room only. It's exciting to see so many people going to the events, to see events selling out. Once people have gone to an event, I think they've wanted to get more involved. The museum's done an incredible job engaging young people and letting young people know just how important their involvement is.
And this is all of us at the tribunal visiting with survivors and children of survivors. My most memorable experience with the museum was traveling with an incredible group of people to Cambodia to witness the joint UN-Cambodian tribunal. That trip was a chance for me to see the global reach of this institution.
The museum is and always will be relevant. And the museum does an incredible job of looking into the past and setting a stage for the future. I toured the collections facility. For me, the thing that has really stuck with me was drawer after drawer after drawer of yellow stars. And I actually asked why they have so many. And the person giving the tour said, because each one belonged to an individual, and each one has their own story, so we can never have too many. It really is on the next generation to ensure that these stories continue to be told, the lessons continue to be learned, the new collections facility. This really is just as important, if not more, than the actual physical museum. These objects will be stewards for the future long after these survivors are gone.
This museum is never again, and never again is not a reality without this museum.
Please join me in welcoming this year's chairs, Scott and Carly Bernstein, Danielle and Jordan Goodman, and Aaron Tucker.
Good afternoon. It's such an honor for all of us to be chairing this event. One additional fact to that video, I met my wife Carly at a Museum Next Gen event. Yet another benefit of involvement with this great cause. While Jordan, Aaron, and I started the associate board, now our wives Carly and Danielle are equally committed to the museum.
I have a wonderful history with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. I was an intern in the museum's office, and my parents were past chairs of this luncheon. So it seemed meant to be that I met my husband at a museum event.
I'm Danielle Goodman. I am the child of a Holocaust survivor. My father, Tom Rudis, immigrated from Hungary by himself at the age of 17. He was later followed by my grandmother, Renee Rudis, and my aunt, Denise Rutke. I understand the importance of preserving Holocaust history, not just for my family's story, but for all survivors, and not just for our 3 sons, but for all children that need to understand this history. I've learned so much from my years of involvement with the museum, and I am so impressed with how this remarkable institution tackles daunting global problems: rising hate and anti-Semitism, genocide, and extremism. I am proud that this museum is the voice that Jews did not have in the 30s and 40s. The museum's Center for the Prevention of Genocide focuses on early warning signs of atrocities, influencing policymakers and alerting the national conscience. Most recently, it issued a declaration that the Burmese military has committed genocide against the Rohingya minority, putting a crucial spotlight on a community that the world has forgotten, and helping Congress and others understand the crimes that occurred. I am so impressed that this institution has the stature to bring lessons of the Holocaust to the floor of the UN General Assembly, like this museum did on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and that the German Parliament invited this museum to educate young Germans on the lessons about collaboration and complicity that made the Holocaust possible.
My great-aunt, Helene, was sent to this country alone as a 12-year-old child. My great-grandparents took her into their home and adopted her. On that day, she became my grandmother's sister, and they were inseparable for the rest of their lives. Helene's immediate family perished in Auschwitz. Her son, Ricky Friedman, is here today, and together we honor Helene's memory and the community that came together to save her. The museum does an incredible job of memorializing the past while ensuring its lessons remain relevant for today's world. We want you to know that none of the museum's work is possible without your support of the campaign. 45 million people have walked through the doors of the museum since it opened 26 years ago, and 20 million people access the museum's website every year from around the world. After the massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue, the museum's educational resources on anti-Semitism were viewed 400,000 times in just 6 months. And the museum's social media posts were so powerful that one post reached over 1.5 million people. We have so many special guests here today, but none more important than our Holocaust survivors. You inspire us. I've thought a lot about what you endured and what this disturbing rise in anti-Semitism and extremism must be like for you. And I want you to know that we are committed to ensuring that anti-Semitism and hate speech do not become normalized. So many people are essential to this event. To those who have chaired the event in the past, you set a great example for us. And we want to give a special thanks to Richard Price, Richard, you have been an extraordinary role model, and we strive to emulate you as a leader. We take a moment to remember all those we lost this year. Special mention to those who had a leadership role with this event: Bob Applebaum, Paul Krause, and Manny Steinfeld. And our thanks to the museum staff. You have been our guiding light every step of the way.
Being dedicated to and involved with this museum has been very important to us since graduating college over 11 years ago. We hope that's a message to all the young people in the room that it's time to step up and be the future of this institution. I encourage those in your 20s, 30s, and 40s to be part of the next generation trip to the museum on November 16th and 17th, and for everyone to be part of the next Chicago community trip this June 7th and 8th. As the youngest people to ever chair this event, we're proud to show the community the next generation cares, that we are engaged, and we deeply thank everyone in this room for your support of this institution and our personal work on its behalf. We encourage members of our generation to take action, and we promise to stand with you. Today, we are pleased to recognize our partners from Holocaust Community Services and the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. We are fortunate to have among us many elected officials, including Congressman Brad Schneider, a member of the United States Holocaust Memorial Council, as well as Consul Generals from France, Frederick Chloe, Israel, Aviv Ezra, Lithuania, Montevidas Bekasus, Poland, Peter Janecki, and Ukraine, Andriy Janielik, as well as chairwoman of the Lithuanian Jewish community, Fania Kukalansky. Next, we are delighted to welcome our mayor, Lori Lightfoot. Mayor Lightfoot has made clear public statements, and I quote, "Hate has no place in Chicago. Fighting for never again is as much global as it is local, and we have civic leaders here at home clearly engaged in that pursuit." Please welcome me in joining the mayor of the city of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot.
I want to thank Aaron and all the members of the committee. And Aaron, in particular, I want to thank you for your call to action. It is time for all of us to step up. In the environment that we're in, with the hate that we see rearing its ugly head across the country and across the world, we cannot rest. We have to be diligent and fight back against the hate. It's always an honor to join the Holocaust Memorial Museum, but this moment for me is especially meaningful and poignant. I, along with many of you here, recently lost a close friend, Michael Bauer. It is because of Michael that I am here today. He made a point of making sure that we put this on the calendar and that I was here to bear witness. He was a consummate supporter and champion for the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and its mission of education and human rights. From his role as the museum's gay and lesbian campaign to leading trips to the museum, chairing local events, and encouraging all people, Jew and Gentile alike, to participate. As many of you know, Michael was the son of 2 Holocaust survivors, both of whom were the sole survivors of their families, leading him and his brother Jerry to grow up in a family without aunts and uncles, grandparents, and cousins. And we know, unfortunately, this is the reality of many survivors. He had, though, a very close-knit family and community. Michael always said that one of the events that greatly shaped his life was an event that ended 7 years before he was born. And to know Michael is to know how true that was. The reality of the Holocaust and the issue of genocide was one of the singular animating forces in his political outlook and activism. As Michael himself said, if it happened, it can happen again. And maybe not to Jews, but to another group. And sadly, those words are true. You saw and felt Michael's urgency and passion and how he fought for the rights of the LGBTQ+ community, how he fought to protect abortion rights, how he fought against AIDS, and of course, in his support of Israel and his work at the Holocaust Museum. His determination to fight every vestige of racism and bigotry was also the way of carrying out his parents' legacy. At its core, it was a fight for fairness, equality, and justice, and never, ever forgetting. Michael had an incredible zest for life and a joy he carried in everything he did and loved. And it's in this way that I'd like to recognize Roger Simon, who's with us here today, Michael's husband and partner for 40 years. And Roger, our hearts are with you. We will always stand with you and make sure that we fulfill our obligation to Michael to make sure that you are loved and protected. And I'd also like to take a moment to honor Michael's mother, Tima Bauer, who is a remarkable 103 years old. Her story is actually memorialized in the museum because of the respect and diligence and responsibility that Michael felt in making sure that her story and his father's story were told and memorialized. Tima is not only a survivor of the Lodz ghetto, but a slave labor factory and the horrific death marches before the end of the war. She was, as Michael said, one of the most remarkable people he had ever known. If you have the opportunity to speak with her, that is not an exaggeration. To all of our survivors, we are here to honor you, to make sure that we carry forth your stories and that we never forget. What you experience should never be experienced by any people ever again. As Michael knew, when we say never again, we must be resolved that the stories that we hear today not only awaken our consciousness, but shape the politics and policies of our leaders here today. Listening to the voices of our survivors is a very important and powerful experience, and please join me in listening to their messages.
You really couldn't imagine doing the things that they did to the Jews without hating them.
32 of my family members, most of them starved to death or gassed to death.
Hundreds of women and children marched from the train to the gas chamber.
They were ordered to undress, and they were gunned down in a trench.
My father always said, "We'll live together or we'll die together." She was 19 months old and just learning to walk.
Innocent children, why were they not spared and why was I spared?
Surviving had a purpose, and the purpose was to remember.
Perhaps by telling the story to as many people as possible, we might leave a world where there is no more atrocities or genocide.
We are getting old, and our numbers are diminishing daily.
I'll be my voice after I'm gone.
We can't do anything about the past, but we can about the future.
Just think, perhaps you are the only hope I have. Fulfill it.
To all the survivors here, our promise to you is to keep your memories alive, and we will never forget.
I now ask all the survivors and the children and grandchildren of survivors to hold up the candle at your plate and turn it on.
Now, everyone, please light your candles and raise them high.
Please join us in our pledge to the future and to all who will give light to the darkest chapter in our history.
Let's say together, we will remember. We will remember.
Again, we will remember. Thank you.
Please join us in the Motzi, led by Renee and Joe Silberman, chairs of our Children of Survivors group.
We are mindful of all our families and our people lost during the Holocaust. We honor the survivors and their resilience to rebuild. We are strengthened by our history and our legacy. We are grateful for our sustenance.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Few individuals have made a greater impact on the public understanding of the dangers of anti-Semitism than our guest speaker today. Her latest book, Anti-Semitism Here and Now, explores the subject in an engaging exchange of letters. She is perhaps best known for her successful defense against Holocaust denier David Irving, which was made into the major motion picture Denial. She has played many vital roles at the museum from its beginning, including being the founding chair of the museum's anti-Semitism initiative. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Deborah Lipstadt.
What an honor and a privilege it is to be here, and what an amazing sight it is to look out on this crowd. And what is so invigorating is to see 5 young people chairing this event, ensuring that next generations will remember. I've been associated with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum when its offices were on 2000 L Street, and the museum was a dream. I had a chance to participate in planning the part of the permanent exhibition on the American response to the Holocaust. I had presidential appointments to the Holocaust Council. I've served as a scholar in residence and now chair of the Committee on Anti-Semitism and Holocaust Denial, and now tomorrow I return to the museum for 9 months to be a scholar in residence and continue with my research. Thank you. Should be clapping for those who chose me at the museum. This museum is such an important addition to the American landscape, not the American Jewish landscape, the American landscape. And none of us who participated when it was being dreamt of and designed and devised and planned ever dreamt that in 2019, 25 years after the museum was open, it would be so necessary, and yet it is. I begin with a joke I heard in Moscow in 1972 when I was there visiting refuseniks, those Jews who wanted to leave the Soviet Union but were refused permission by the Soviet authorities, even though the Soviet Union supposedly allowed for family reunification. I was walking in the street with a refusenik, and we were being conspicuously followed by a KGB man in a car. I mean, he wanted to make his presence known. And I asked the refusenik, how do you manage to survive this oppression? And he said, many ways. One of them is with humor. I said, tell me. So he told me the following joke. Word goes out in Moscow that a store will get a shipment of shoes. And any of you who had the dubious pleasure of visiting the Soviet Union know that there was a decided lack of material goods in this supposed paradise. Stores would have displays in windows that had an inch of dust on them because they were never changed. And even if you wanted what was in the window when you went in, it was rarely available. So when word goes out that there will be shoes, people line up. It's January, it's dead of winter. People line up from the evening before to be sure to be able to get a pair of shoes. Didn't matter what size, what style, you would buy it, you would trade it, you would sell it on the black market. By the time the store is supposed to open, nothing happens. Then a few hours later, the manager comes out, looks at the long line, and he says, "There will not be enough shoes for everyone on this line. Jews are not getting shoes. All Jews go home." So the Jews left the line and went home. A few hours later, he comes out, "There will not be enough shoes for everybody on this line. All non-Communist Party members go home." So the non-members of the Communist Party go home. Not enough shoes, all non-veterans go home. Finally, end of the day, it's already dark, they're frozen solid. Left on line are a group of veterans of the Great War, of World War II, with their medals. They're the only ones who have been allowed to stay. The manager comes out and says, "There won't be any shoes today. Everyone go home." So as two of these veterans walk away from the store, disappointed, angry, one turns to the other and says, "Those Jews, they have all the luck." I begin with that story because it demonstrates the imbecility, the delusional nature of anti-Semitism. How do we fight something that makes no sense? Jews are capitalists, Rothschild, Soros, whatever. Jews are communists. Jews are pushy, wanting to be in places and parts of clubs and areas and neighborhoods that don't want them. Jews are clannish. They always stick together. How can you be communist and capitalist, pushy and sticking together at the same time? It makes no sense. But that doesn't matter to the anti-Semite. Today I stand before you concerned, worried, and dare I say it, as someone who eschews hyperbole, frightened about our future. Never in all my years have I worried about the future of our country and beyond. Our world is riven by deep divisions, divisions that many people, politicians, pundits, social media forcers, and others seek to deepen and to make more severe. These divisions are rooted in hatred and contempt. The sentiments they express may not be new, but what's different, I'll tell you what's different about today. Today, the haters feel emboldened. They feel free to express and even celebrate their contempt for others. We saw it on the video, Sarah showing the websites. They are all over the internet. I approach this topic from a lifelong study of anti-Semitism and from having spent 6 years in a legal battle, 12 weeks in court itself, fighting the epitome of anti-Semitism in the form of Holocaust denial. I've spent the past 3 years writing the book that was mentioned in the introduction, Anti-Semitism Here and Now. And all that leaves me greatly worried about the future. But you can't study anti-Semitism without recognizing that it's prejudice. And it is akin in many other respects to other isms: racism, homophobia, sexism, hatred of other ethnicities and religion. The fact is that if prejudice weren't so lethal, it would be easy to dismiss it as idiotic or just plain stupid. Think about the etymology of the word prejudice. Prejudge. Don't confuse me with the facts. I've made up my mind about a person before I've even met them or interacted with them. As one pundit observed, you meet the stereotype right in front of your nose while the person is still 2 blocks away. You see an African American, you know how they are. You see a person who identifies as gay, you know how they are. You see a Jew, you know how they are because of the stereotype. And though prejudicial stereotypes are illogical, they can cause horrific damage. While anti-Semitism is akin to racism and the other isms I mentioned, it has certain distinct elements which I think bear repeating and ferreting out today. Let me briefly enumerate. The racist punches down. He or she sees the black or brown person or the Muslim as lesser than and dangerous to the white Christian society. The racist charges that these people will harm the Christian gene pool, whatever they construe that to be. The racist declares when they move into our neighborhoods or their kids go to our kids' school, they'll bring it down. So the racist punches down to try to defeat this assault. When they talk about an infestation, a swarm of people coming from across the border, they're using hyperbolic language, which suggests, again, these people are people of color and they will bring us down. So how does that contrast with the anti-Semite? The anti-Semite, and by the way, of course, the racist and the anti-Semite, one and the same. We're just talking about their different perspectives, but it's usually the same person. The anti-Semite punches up. He or she sees the Jews as demonic-like group behind this so-called white genocide. The Jews are manipulating it. The Jews are directing it. The anti-Semite/racist looks out on the world and sees black and brown people supposedly taking their jobs, even being elected to the highest office in the world, but says, these people who are lesser than us, they can't do it on their own. There's someone behind, manipulating it, someone directing it. Who is that someone? The Jew. That's what the people in Charlottesville meant as they marched across the campus founded by Thomas Jefferson with their tiki torches, chanting, Jews will not replace us. These black and brown people are coming, but who's directing it? Who's directing this white genocide? This is the Jew. It's what the murderer in Pittsburgh, the murderer in San Diego, the murderer in Pittsburgh cried as he was being brought down by the SWAT team after having murdered 11 Jews and wounded others. You will not destroy the white race. You are behind this infestation. There's another added distinctive element to anti-Semitism which distinguishes it from other prejudices. It is seen as a conspiracy theory. That's what this white replacement theory is all about. Jews are conspiring. They are not just to be hated, they are to be feared. They are evil. They may appear to be doing good, but in fact, they are doing evil. And the other distinctive element I want to mention of anti-Semitism is, unlike most other isms, we find anti-Semitism on the political right and on the political left. We find it, and it's not different anti-Semitism. It's the same anti-Semitism. The same tropes, the same stereotypes, the same memes. In the face of all these prejudices, what shall we do? Optimally, this should be a top-down effort, led by political leaders of all stripes and all backgrounds who will unequivocally demonstrate that they have no sympathy and give no succor to those who hate. But at the moment in our country and in too many other countries, these leaders are absent. We can't leave this fight in their hands alone. We must fight bottom up. So what can each of us individually here do? First of all, we must become the unwelcome guest at the dinner party. It's not uncommon, a Thanksgiving dinner, a Passover Seder, a July 4th celebration, a Christmas party, or whatever, for the host or the hostess to remind us that Uncle XYZ is coming, Aunt ABC, cousin whatever is coming, and we know they're likely to tell a racist joke, an anti-Semitic crack, a homophobic remark, and then to be asked by our host, do me a favor, just ignore it. We want to have a peaceful, pleasant dinner. Well, I don't think we can do that anymore. I don't think we can do that in this atmosphere. You may have to warn your host if you ever want to be invited back that you're not going to sit idly by. You may not change the mind, and sadly, you probably won't change the mind or the attitude of that awful uncle, that intolerable aunt, that egotistical cousin. But you'll telegraph a message, not only to the young people at the table, but especially to the young people at the table, that this kind of behavior is not tolerated in our house. We don't talk like that. We don't think like that. We don't act like that. No genocide, including the Holocaust, ever began with action. It always begins with words. Not everyone who engages in prejudicial words will end up taking action, but everyone who does something evil began with words. Hearing those words, seeing those words, including on the internet, speaking those words. Recently, there was an event, didn't get much attention, in Washington, D.C., at a public school, a middle school, where a group of African-American and Caucasian kids were playing football, and at one point, one of the students, the white students, turned to the African-Americans and used the N-word. And they were shocked, and they looked at him, and then he said, and you can call me a racist, but I don't care. He heard that at home. Not just the N-word, but the I don't care. It begins in small ways. It begins with small comments. It began that way in Germany. It began that way in Germany long before 1933. But when the National Socialists came to power, they didn't begin by designing death camps. They began by controlling the newspapers, controlling speech, firing Jewish teachers, firing Jewish judges, Jewish lawyers. Because anti-Semitism, unlike the other prejudices, comes from both ends of the political spectrum, from the right and from the left, we must fight it on both sides of the spectrum. I find that those who are on the right are quick to recognize it on the left, and those who are on the left have no trouble seeing it on the right, but they are often blind or refusing to see what is right next to them. They have weaponized the fight against anti-Semitism, against prejudice, and transformed the fight into a political cudgel. We each have to look at where we sit and the people whose views we might share on other matters, and if they engage in prejudice, call them out. Fighting all kinds of prejudice, including anti-Semitism, is not about scoring political points. And if we cannot call out our compatriots on this issue, the people next to whom we stand, how can we call out the other side? And the museum believes this so strongly and acts on it. Though I have spoken much today, mainly of anti-Semitism, we must recognize we can't be against one ism without being against other isms. If we're going to fight prejudice, we must fight it across the board. You cannot fight anti-Semitism but be blind to racism, or even worse, engage in it yourself. And you cannot fight racism but be blind to anti-Semitism. You cannot fight for women's rights but engage in overt anti-Semitism. The Jew in the kippah, the Muslim woman in the hijab, the African-American teen in a hoodie, the Latino kids gathered in a group at a park must feel as safe as everyone else. And if you see them or hear them harassed or hear comments about them, you must feel as outraged as if it's coming at you. Because in the fight against evil, there are no bystanders. If you stand by when you see evil, then what you're doing is voting with the perpetrator. Jews know that something that starts with the Jews never ends there. And they know also that something may start with other groups of people, but eventually it will end with the Jews. Jews also know something else, and I come back to what I had said earlier, that no genocide begins with action. There's been too much anti-Semitism in history that began with words, spoken words by Christian leaders, spoken words by communist leaders, spoken words by pseudoscientists, spoken words by neo-Nazis. And we also must recognize that no healthy democratic society can abide having anti-Semitism in its midst growing and developing and consider itself healthy. Because if, as I argued earlier, anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory, if you doubt what's the democratic institutions, if you doubt the judges, if you doubt the governmental institutions, if you doubt the press, if you think they're all part of a conspiracy, then you are threatening the very democracy we so treasure. We must be in this together with all our hearts and with all our souls and with all our might. And we must also consider ourselves very lucky, or dare I say it, blessed, that adjacent to the mall in Washington, D.C., and if ever America had a public square, that is America's public square, there stands an institution like the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. It stands to commemorate an action which destroyed 1 out of every 3 Jews on the face of the earth in less than 5 years. But it stands there not just as a commemoration of what happened to Jews, but as a reminder that if it can happen to one group, it can happen to another. If it happened once, it can happen again. It is a tremendous credit to our nation that it stands there, and it is a challenge to us to support it, to help it, to ensure that not only will it stand there, but it will continue to teach next generations that what you do matters. Thank you very much.
Deborah, first of all, I want you to know there is no peaceful dinner that I ever attend. But way beyond that, your words are sobering. The anti-Semitism that Deborah just spoke of is real. It's now. It is the very thing that my parents fled some 80 years ago. My name is Beatrice Muchman. Somehow Trixie has stuck, so some of you know me as Trixie. It may be hard for you to imagine me as a little 5-year-old in Berlin, surrounded by a large and loving family. My first concrete memory, though chaotic, is Kristallnacht, when unfortunately too late, my parents fled Berlin to Brussels, Belgium, which was going to be a haven because other family had fled to Brussels. A harrowing journey over a closed border. All the while, everyone had been trying to get affidavits to come to America. Unbeknownst to us, the American border was already closed to Jews. Eventually, what is now known as the final solution, my parents were forced to make the heart-rending decision to give me up, their only child. But this was the only possibility for life for their child. Through the Belgian underground Jewish committee in this little Catholic country of Belgium, many, many upstanding citizens came forward to save Jewish children. My parents were connected with 2 Catholic women living in a little village outside of Brussels. When my father kissed me goodbye, I had no idea I would never see my parents goodbye. I was 11. While my parents saved my life, they were unable to save their own. Like millions of others, their fate was on the way to Auschwitz. I was converted. My identity was changed. Yet everyone in this little village knew that I was a Jewish child. Other Jewish children were hidden there, right in front of the Nazi authorities stationed right there in this little village. The personal responsibility taken by these incredible, special people taught me the values that now lead me to support the work done by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. The museum isn't just a structure. There's work being done within that structure every single minute of every single day. This very museum is the keeper of our memories and the narrator of our stories. That is where surviving artifacts remain the witness when we are no longer able to be the spokespeople. The museum is staffed with devoted and knowledgeable experts, and its outreach in 15 foreign languages fights prejudice and ignorance all over the world. This is a shared goal that we absolutely must support. That's our job. The museum is a team. It's the agent of change, doing the work that we cannot do alone, try as we might. Our stories are being digitized and preserved, made available to students, teachers, and scholars on the museum's website. I go on it regularly, and I encourage everybody to do the same. Most recently, I had the immense joy of bringing my grandson, Robert Rafer, to Washington to view our very own family collection. It was a life-changing experience for both of us. To see the care with which our family collection was treasured, All this can be seen on the museum's website. This is one of the many, many reasons that I have donated my collection to the museum. Not only have I invested personally in this museum, but this museum has deeply and personally invested in me. Other survivors also are ensured that their stories will be shared and told to future generations. This costs a lot of money. Our museum opens its doors to thousands of people every single day without any charge. Imagine the cost you incur when you take your family to any museum in Chicago. And yet, our museum in Washington, well, you can get in without any fee. Obviously, this is a drain on finances, but it's been a tradition from the onset. And with our help, I hope it remains so. Because this museum is our very own legacy to the world. No one likes to ask for money. I've never done it. I did it for Jill. If I didn't believe that it was so important, especially at this very moment, listening to Deborah, especially at this very moment, to give to this institution, I would not be standing here right now. More than any other year that I can remember. This is urgent. This is an urgent time when we need to reach and stretch to increase our giving. More than ever, it's a time to open our hearts and our wallets and give the most we can. This museum, the work that this museum does for us, this museum needs us now. I'm also pleased to tell you that every new and increased dollar will be matched by an anonymous and generous donor. Whoever you are, thank you. This means every increased dollar will double. There will be a minute of silence that many of you are familiar with in order to fill out your pledge cards. Please remember, and you heard Deborah, this is an urgent time. Please remember that this is our very personal responsibility. No one else will do it for us. Open your checkbooks or whatever it is you use, and let's fill out these pledge cards now. Remember that every single dollar counts. You're supposed to be working. You're supposed to be writing and working. It is now my opportunity and my pleasure to introduce Cardinal Blaise Cupich. Thank you, Cardinal.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here today for such an important moment and event. Beatrice, I have to say that I was deeply moved by your inspiring story, but also proud of the women who took you in. We need your voice and the voices of Holocaust survivors now more than ever to steel us in our resolve to confront head-on all attempts to divide humanity through demeaning rhetoric and policies that rob people of their dignity. I say this with personal conviction, especially after my recent trip to Auschwitz with survivor Fritzi Fritzl. Walking side by side, arm in arm with her, Auschwitz and the Holocaust became not just a memory, but a reality. It is up to each of us to make sure that reality never happens again. Fritzi, I thank you. Could you please stand and be recognized? I really am honored to be here with all of you today and introduce the segment of the program in which the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum honors our dear friend, Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Rahm, you were one of the first persons to welcome me here to Chicago. Your hand of friendship encouraged me to extend my own to you and to so many in Chicagoland, for which I am grateful. Remembering, as I do, the open door that welcomed our immigrant parents and grandparents that has made America a great country, you have worked to make our city a place of welcome to the stranger. Convinced that we can do so much more when we work together, you have dedicated yourself to building relationships marked by respect which values diversity, fully aware that our differences are gifts which enrich our lives and the common good. Centuries ago, Aristotle noted that friendships are needed for the growth of civilization. Like justice, friendships, he wrote, are proper to democracies because the citizens, being equal, have much in common. Keeping ever before us that we are equal, that we have so much in common, is the surest antidote to an agenda that traffics in making us suspicious or afraid of each other, because that is the agenda of the tyrant. So, Rahm, in addition to congratulating you today on being honored, I also want to thank you for the friendship that you have offered me and for the dedication that you have given to this city and to our country, and for reminding all of us that it is our friendships that will make the difference in building a civilization that we can be proud of. Congratulations.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome past Luncheon Chair Michael Sachs.
Thank you. Cardinal, I know you can't be here for too long, but I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your commitment to tolerance and for the stand that you take against hate and prejudice and bigotry in any form, and for the speed in which you stand up and speak out, not only for Jews every time that we are targets of hate, but for all people who are targeted. There are over 2 million Catholics in the Chicagoland metro area, and you lead the faithful. I think there are about 15 Jews who couldn't make it here today. Otherwise, this is us. And so what you do when you stand against hate and bigotry is really important, and it's noticed and it's appreciated, and thank you. Risa Lambert was a friend, a good friend, and the Risa Lambert Luncheon is always meaningful and powerful. It is a time that we reflect, and it's a time that we act. And we act not only to strengthen the museum's coffers, but to remember our history and to rededicate ourselves to never again. In being here today, in supporting the museum, we not only ensure never again for the Jewish people, but we commit to justice and tolerance for all people, which is a critical part of the museum's mission. Today is particularly meaningful because our co-chairs represent the next generation of strength and leadership in our community. The fact that it's Goodman and Tucker and Bernstein, all three who Carrie and I know well and are so fond of, makes it personally meaningful for us. And I want to congratulate all of you and thank you all and just tell you it's awesome that you did this and keep doing it. Now, Ram. They didn't give me enough time, Ram. This is a fitting honor for you. It's fitting for you too, Amy, and for the kids, because anyone who knows the two of you well knows there is no Ram without Amy, and there is no Ram without his family. And so, Amy, I want to thank you and congratulate you. Today is for you two and for everything that you have given all of us in Chicago and all of us in the country over 20 years of public service. Thank you. Ram, the reason I think this is fitting for you is because what the museum is, what the museum stands for, in every sense, is what you are. It is who you are, your essence. Now, to a degree, you were born you, and the nature part of the nature versus nurture debate is pretty strong in you. But the nurture piece, the piece that your mom and dad, Ben and Marcia, who are here with us today, and Ben and Marcia, can you stand for a minute and can we please acknowledge Ben and Marcia Emanuel and give them a round of applause. And thank you both for what you've given us. It is what you poured into Ram every day that made him who he is. Ram, your dad instilled in you strength and confidence. He gave you a commitment to your heritage and an understanding of the importance of preserving and defending that heritage. Your mom was woke before woke was a word. She had you at protest marches before you were able to understand what you were protesting, and she instilled in you an understanding of injustice and a commitment to justice and to fairness. And whether you were with Mom at a Vietnam War protest on the Northwestern campus when you were a real little kid, or you were a teenager with your dad in Marquette Park looking to stand up to the Nazis, you've been engaged in the fight and looking to right wrongs and make positive change your entire life. Engaged in the fight. That's the museum, and that's you. You were born with great gifts, but you had instilled in you a belief and a confidence in yourself and in your ability to do great things. You developed a tough exterior with a true and accurate moral compass, while holding on to softer, warmer insides that you don't let most people see. Tough love? Yes, no doubt, but a lot of love, a real lot of love. It is your talents and your character, your values and your insides, we can say kishkis, that have so many of your former teammates here in the room today. Former chiefs of staff, senior advisors, senior staff, Superintendent Johnson, Janice Jackson, the CEO of the Chicago Public Schools, and so many aldermen you served with, all here today. Very few of them knew you when you first took office. None of them knew what to make of you. And they are all here today, not because you're in office and in power and they have to be here, but because you served together, accomplished great things together, because they know who you are and they want to be here today to honor you. Being honored by the museum is fitting for you, Ram, because you are the living, breathing, walking, talking, running, swimming, biking embodiment of what it means to be an upstander. And at its core, being an upstander is what the museum is all about. You've been in the arena virtually your entire adult life, and you have accomplished great things. I don't know if it's possible for you to get enough credit for what you did here in Chicago, for how much value you added, and I'm not talking about the downtown business community. What you did for the schools is nothing less than lead what might be the most successful turnaround of a large public education system, a big unit of government ever. And you gave the city Janus to carry the ball the rest of the way. What you did for neighborhoods with NOF and the parks and libraries and transportation and infrastructure investments was extraordinary. That you did it on the back of the Great Recession with ratings agencies and bond markets holding the governments accountable in a way they never had before, and the fact that you did it with considerable opposition is truly remarkable. You came into the mayor's office at a perilous time, and I personally cannot imagine where we would be today if someone with less strength and less intelligence, someone with less skill and less courage had served. I know what you accomplished, and Eddie and Janice and the aldermen and the commissioners and the staffers, they know what you accomplished, how successful you were, how hard it was, and how strong and courageous you were in your fight. When I grew up, I never thought I would see our first Jewish mayor, or our first mayor who's Jewish. That's an inside joke. I certainly never thought I would be able to be on the team in some small way, and so for me, Ram, personally, I want you to know that it was the privilege of my lifetime to work for you, to go into the arena with you, to be an upstander with you, and to get a few wins. And it's my honor to publicly thank you for being Roosevelt's man in the arena, for all of us, for serving the way you have your entire career, and for leading Chicago and so many of us in the way that you did. And it goes without saying that on behalf of everyone here, I want to thank you for your unwavering support and commitment to the museum. From the Clinton White House when the museum opened, through your days in Congress and the Obama White House, to your support every year you were mayor, from days of remembrance ceremonies to these luncheons to being with the Chicago contingent in DC, thank you. And now there's someone who couldn't be here today who wanted to say a few words. If we could all turn to the video screens.
Congratulations, Ron, as you're being honored at the United States Holocaust Museum 2019 Risa K. Lambert Chicago Luncheon. Throughout your entire life in public service, from the time you came to Arkansas as a young man to work on my campaign, through your service in my White House, your 3 terms in the Congress, your service as President Obama's Chief of Staff, and your 8 years as Mayor of Chicago. And now as a private citizen, you've been a tremendous supporter of the museum and the values for which it stands. In every role you've filled, you've spoken out firmly against anti-Semitism and bigotry of any kind. You've worked to advance policies that promote tolerance and shared opportunity. With anti-Semitism, hatred, and violence on the rise in America, that kind of leadership is more important than ever. It's also why the mission of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum remains so vital. Its direct memories fade, and we find ourselves further and further from the lived experience of the Holocaust. We need the records, the photographs, and the stories to remain. We need to know what happened once and remain vigilant about stopping future atrocities. I know you know that. You've lived it. So thanks, Rom, for everything. for your friendship, for your service, for your commitment. And thanks to all of you who are there tonight for your commitment to the museum. It was my honor to be there when it opened, and I'm more grateful than ever for your efforts to make sure that its timeless lessons are heard loud and clear all across America.
Please come up, Ram, and please join me in congratulating and honoring Rahm Emanuel.
Thank you. I made a pledge I was going to get you out by midnight, so don't worry about it. Michael, thank you very much. I want to thank you not only for the remarks, the heartfeltness of the remarks, and for, as I said when President Obama asked about you, I said everybody in public life needs one Michael Sachs in their life. And I was fortunate to find that Michael Sachs. And I want to thank you for your commitment. Second is, I don't want to say actually thank you to the survivors because it's not appropriate. But I do want to say to the survivors, your example is the power of the human spirit in the face of evil. And there is nothing that exists in the museum that is more powerful than your statement to move on and keep being leaders. So if we can, again, in one way or another, show an appreciation to all the survivors that are here and their families. Okay, Deborah, thank you for your remarks. I do want to also note, she wrote, if you did not see it, she had a book review yesterday, an incredible book review in the New York Times about memory and the difference between Germany and the United States and what that means for reconciliation. And I really do recommend the book review. It's a tremendous, both the book and her review of it. I want to also thank all the administrators and members of my administration who are here. This is the first free meal they've ever gotten from me in 8 years. And they're there now packing all the desserts in their briefcases. I do want to say also to Amy, and thank her not only for being here, because in the last 2 weeks as the kids were getting back to school, our hallway was a little more like the baggage claim at O'Hare Terminal 1, and that she is here given everything that trying to get all the kids settled back in school. And I want to thank her not just for that, but more importantly for being by my side throughout my entire career and life, and being part of what we've built. And I say this story, I want to say a little story because when Amy and the kids came to Washington after I was there for 6 months, one of the first things we did was take the kids to the museum. When we went to Israel for Zachariah's bar mitzvah, replicating what my mother did when we got to Israel in 67, 68, 69, 70, and 71, and 72, and 73, was even before the bags were at our apartment, we would be at Yad Vashem. You know that famous Mark Twain quote, at 12 I concluded my father was a fool. By 18 I was shocked what he learned in only 6 years. So Amy and I deciding that I would never do what my father and mother did. As soon as we got to Washington, D.C., you're going to go to the Holocaust Museum. As soon as we land in Israel, you're going to go to Yad Vashem and see the names of the righteous. So that tells you what Mark Twain said was absolutely correct, which is I swore I would never do what my parents did. It's exactly what we ended up doing, to make sure that Zachariah, Alana, and Leah had exactly what they needed, which was an education of both being Jewish and being proud. I do want to say something more about what my parents taught us. Growing up in our family room, in the middle of that family wall was a purse. That was Sophie Lambert's, my grandmother on my mother's side's purse that had her passports with her and her 2 sisters, and the passports. And on either side of those pictures of the passport and her purse that brought her to this great country were the pictures, black and white, of my two parents' relatives who never made it to America. And all of those eyes, when we were growing up, were on us. That we were fortunate. We had come to the greatest country in the world. That the son and a grandson of immigrants could be the chief of staff to the President of the United States and mayor of a great city. Don't anybody ever tell you this is not the greatest country in the world. It is the greatest country. And that our time here was not to be wasted. That our time here was to contribute and to make a difference, to put your thumb on the scale, because those who never made it required it of us. And I say that because in the span of Jewish history, the American Jewish community is unique. A chief of staff to a president, leaders in finance and business, leaders in labor, leaders in the arts and entertainment. In the span of the Jewish history of 5,000 years, the American Jewish community is unique. And therefore, in that uniqueness, we have an obligation. An obligation to make sure that those who come behind us are benefited from the experiences we had. And in a time in which we, Ari and Zeke and I, would go to Yad Vashem or the Holocaust Museum and we would take them, our own children, would we act different than how America acted when the boat of the St. Louis was turned from American shores, and underscoring what Hitler said, nobody wants the Jews? Would we act different when kids were being separated from their parents? Would we act different at that moment in time when, in fact, there was a time in which people were described as lice, infecting, criminal elements? The museum is not just about never again. It is not about memory. It is about inspiration to act, to be a voice and resilience in our resistance to all bigotry wherever it exists. Because yesterday may have been Jacob, but today it is Jose. Yesterday may have been Saul, today it is Saul. Yesterday it may have been Herman, my grandfather, today it is Enrique. And we have an obligation. This is our St. Louis moment. Are we going to accept a rhetoric at a time that tells others they're criminal, they're dirty, they don't belong, they're infesting? We have seen it. We know what it leads to. Because if you delegitimize and dehumanize somebody, you can do anything you want to them. And it is on us, the most influential Jewish community in the history of the Jewish people, to have the courage of our conscience, to be resistant and have the resilience of our resistance, and never accept, in the name of a support of Israel, that somebody could trot out tried and true anti-Semitism to divide Jews. That is wrong. It is wrong that somebody, now I don't want to violate the Holocaust Museum 501c3 status, but I'm going to get really close to the line here. I know you got a tax status. Just turn the microphone off when you think I crossed it. But to me, the idea, when I served the President of the United States, there was no question. I was not serving a prime minister. I was serving a president of the United States, and I was honored to do it as an American Jew. The people at the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh were killed because they were Jews practicing their Judaism, and they were killed also because they were American, not just Jews. What were they working on? Refugee status and immigrants for those coming, whether that is across the Rio or across the Pacific or across the Atlantic. And we, those with financial, political, and other types of power, we have to be the voice of power against those who are powerless and have no voice. We have to use our influence to those who lack influence. And I say that because we have a responsibility that comes. For all those that have been before us, we have a unique moment in this time, and never to be silent. Now, I don't know about Deborah's notion of people coming to meals. At a Jewish meal that I know Deborah must have been at, there is nobody that gets along with anybody. So to pick which aunt or uncle is a little hard in our view. We fiercely agree with each other. And I would say at this moment, this time, we owe America that has given us so much the honesty to say there is no place for talking about dual loyalty when it comes to American Jews. There is no place. You cannot say you're a friend of the Jewish community or Israel when you talk and define us by only our money, not the wealth of our spirit. And I think at this moment, when we have a president and a leader of this great country that stands for the symbols of freedom, liberty, opportunity, who has trotted out tried and true anti-Semitism, we have a responsibility to call it for what it is when it happens. And I say this also because there's a young man I met at Solario High School on the southwest side of the city of Chicago, Lorenzo. He introduced me about 3 years ago when we opened up that school, and he's here with us today. And I've asked him because he's about to go to Northwestern on a full ride. He's a dreamer. This, too, is the last free meal he's going to get. The reason I say that is his older brother's at Northwestern. Single mother. Younger brother, straight A student. The mother, a custodian that cleans schools. 3 kids going to Northwest, 2 going to Northwestern, the other one's about to apply. Does this country provide Lorenzo and his brothers and his mother an opportunity? Will we, who have come on the backs of others, who have paved the path to give this great country the opportunity that we are the most influential Jews in the history of the Jewish people, and that's a lot of 5,000 years? To Lorenzo and to all the others who have faced now one of the most hostile moments in time, we owe them the resilience of our resistance, the courage of our convictions, and to use this luncheon, this museum, this gathering, not to just say never again, but to inspire us to action, to inspire us to speak up, speak out, and be heard for those who cannot be seen and those who cannot be heard. And if we do that, this luncheon and this museum will have served a purpose that will live beyond us. And in the end of the day, our responsibility is to come alone, is to leave the world better and to heal the world. And this America, the America that my grandfather came to 94 years ago, I had never thought his America would be at this time. We owe Herman, Sophie, our relatives, the responsibility to know that their journey to this great country, that we will remind America of its greatness in its time of peril, so that it lives for another generation of greatness. Thank you for this honor.